All right, it's great to be back with you all. In this brief video, we're going to be discussing McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. And McGregor developed this particular theory in 1960. And McGregor may be a name that you're familiar with. He was also the author of the book, The Human Side of the Enterprise. And this was a pretty influential piece of literature because for the first time, someone made the claim that the most important asset at the disposal of organizations wasn't financial resources, it wasn't equipment or anything else for that matter. It was actually your human resources, i.e. your labor force. So a very, very influential piece of literature. But back to Theory X and Theory Y, developed by McGregor, who of course was a professor over at MIT for some length of time. Theory X and Theory Y is really two assumptions that we have with regards to human behavior in the workplace. So really we kind of subscribe primarily to two of these different schools of thought, if you will. And so he divided them up as Theory X and of course Theory Y. With Theory X, the assumptions, and remember these are general assumptions, not necessarily to apply to everyone, but a kind of a general assumption, was that employees are inherently lazy. They are unambitious, they lack ambition for the most part. They possess little capacity for creativity. And so in this particular sense, we're looking at employees solely as really things to be managed. The only way to motivate employees is to provide them with some type of monetary incentives to appeal to their physiological needs, their security needs, as kind of coined by Maslow in the 1940s. And so as a result, right, if you had this belief, right, if you believed in the assertions of Theory X, this would change or alter your behavior, right? You would need to be more controlling, maybe incorporate more coercion, be more directing, as a way of helping your employees accomplish their organizational objectives because employees lack the ambition and the drive to do it themselves. And so this was one belief, right? This is one assumption that you can have. And if you believed in these assumptions, obviously, according to McGregor, this would, of course, affect your behavior and how you engage with employees. Now, McGregor did not necessarily believe in Theory X, but this was a widely held belief for some period of time. We really looked at employees only as a tool for productivity and nothing more than that. If I wanted an employee to produce more, I had to pay them more, I had to provide more monetary incentives. There wasn't anything else that employees were interested in. And McGregor began to assess the kind of the situation in the United States at this point in time. We lived in a democratic society. Education, or the rate of those that were becoming educated, was increasing. Standard of living was increasing substantially. So McGregor felt that there may be a shift in really looking through a Theory X lens may not be accurate anymore, because if we're truly becoming more educated and our standard of living is increasing, does that necessarily, is it consistent with being lazy and lacking ambition and not having creativity? It really isn't for the most part. And so he developed the Theory Y portion of this particular theory. And the Theory Y portion believes, for the most part, not everyone, but for the most part, that employees are not lazy, that they do have ambition, that they legitimately enjoy the work that they do and will seek out positions of responsibility and authority, and that they're not solely motivated by money, that they're in fact motivated by a wider variety of different things. Right? If you're looking at this from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, including everything from social to esteem to self-actualization needs, these are all very, very important. It wasn't simply monetary incentives that could reward and motivate people to accomplish organizational objectives. It was a matter of appealing to a broader set of needs, right? Those social, those esteem, those self-actualization needs. And so essentially, if you had someone who believed in these assumptions, right, their behavior would be much different. They wouldn't be overly controlling and coercive as a way of trying to make people accomplish these objectives. But they believe that employees could be more self-directed. They believe that employees could work independently. And so they allowed them to assume varying levels of responsibility. So those are the two theories, theory X and theory Y, kind of what the general belief is. But remember, it's more of an assumption of human behavior. It's how I evaluate people in the workplace, what I believe my fundamental core belief is on how they're going to act in the workplace. So what do we do with this? A word of caution. This isn't, one bad theory and one good theory. Many times we look at this and we think, obviously, right, theory X over here, we think this is bad, right? Because this means employees are lazy and we're controlling and we're directive and we maybe are a little coercive. So we think this is bad. Theory Y, rather, we think is good. And McGregor cautioned against this kind of simplistic approach, right? We always like to have a good and a bad, a hero and a villain, right? We're very much like that. But this isn't what he was saying. This was just a general assumption on how we viewed human behavior. This wasn't a good and a bad, right? Theory X managers are bad, theory Y managers are good. That's not what he's saying at all. Now, what he's saying is it's a generally held belief on how we process things and how we view human behavior in the workplace. And what he did caution is, even though if you have a manager who subscribes to, let's say, theory Y, although that might be their fundamental belief, that they believe that employees are not lazy, they may still find situations in which they need to engage in theory X behaviors. Because imagine a new employee in an organization, they don't have the skills or the knowledge necessary to do the work. So is it fair to allow them to work independently? You haven't yet shown them the ropes, haven't yet shown them how to do their jobs. So really, it's all situational. If you're familiar with Blanchard and Hersey's work on situational leadership, it's a matter of kind of not necessarily focusing on one thing. I'm going to be all theory X or all theory Y. It's about understanding the situation and the employee that's in the kind of in the circumstance here, and then learning how to tailor what I do to that particular individual. Not, blanketly applying one assumption. That might be my core belief, but the reality of it is I have to assess each one individually and then obviously make the best decision. So just word of caution on that. We very much so get into the mentality that theory X is the bad one and theory Y is good, which is not what he's saying. It's just a generally held belief. Where we can get into some issues is when we kind of blanketly apply one theory in all situations and use that to kind of direct our behavior, when in reality, we should be looking at each situation on a case-by-case basis. So that's McGregor's theory X and theory Y. If you have questions, hopefully I covered it in enough detail, but also keeping in mind time constraints. If you have questions, feel free and post a comment in the box below. I'll try to get back to those as quickly as I can. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of the day.